The other day, I talked about this MAGA Republican, this married father of 4 kids getting caught up soliciting peaches from an underage girl, or what he thought was an underage girl. Now it looks like he is about to face stiffer penalties, and no pun intended, stiffer penalties for what he thought was soliciting. All right, it says ex-state senator is charged in federal court where the potential sentence is 10 years in prison. Other men arrested in the same operation are likely to get probation in state court. And just a reminder, this is his face, 40-year-old Justin Eichorn. The potential consequences are far more severe for one of the 9 men charged this week with soliciting peaches following an undercover sting operation by Bloomington police. That man is 40-year-old Justin Eichorn of Grand Rapids, a Republican who resigned from the Minnesota State Senate on Thursday, 3 days after his arrest in a Bloomington parking lot, and as his fellow senators were poised to expel him. Eichorn and the others were charged this week in Hennepin County District Court with the same felony of soliciting peaches from a minor over the age of 16. But Eichorn is so far alone in being charged by the U.S. Attorney's Office rather than state authorities. That means a conviction on the federal count of attempted coercion and enticement of a minor would bring a mandatory 10-year prison sentence. The men prosecuted in Hennepin County are likely to be spared prison entirely, according to several veteran Twin Cities defense attorneys not associated with these cases. The likeliest outcome, if the men are found guilty, these attorneys said, are state guidelines sentences of probation. The cases charged in Hennepin County would be eligible for federal charges because of the use of the internet by the defendant's constituents' interstate commerce. That's what got Eichorn in federal court. A spokeswoman for the U.S. Attorney's Office declined Thursday to directly answer whether Eichorn was being charged in federal court because his public profile rises above the other men arrested in the sting, which involved Bloomington investigators posing as underage girls online. However, a statement from acting U.S. Attorney Lisa Kirkpatrick announcing the federal prosecution volunteered that her office has no tolerance for public officials who violate federal law, particularly those laws meant to protect children. All right, so he was elected in 2016. It says that he's married with 4 children. I've already said that. The Hennepin County Attorney's Office says it's standard practice to step aside when federal prosecutors claim a local case. A spokesman for County Attorney Mary Moriarty said in an email that we cannot speak to the U.S. Attorney's Office decision to take one and not the others. Defense Attorney Paul Rogoshevsky said that on the face of it, it's kind of goofy for Eichorn's case to be charged federally. In my opinion, the federal government should not be involved in these kinds of cases, he said. This part is what's going to get him caught up. The state and federal charges both allege Eichorn was familiar with the jargon of shopping for X. He texts to the undercover officers the acronyms QV or HHR, meaning a quick visit or a half an hour of X. He also used slang for not using a condom. Also, the charges noted, Eichorn attempted a tactic to reassure himself that he wasn't chatting with a cop. He asked for a photo of his correspondent wearing just a bra and underwear while holding up 2 fingers. Deterrent motivating federal prosecutors. Defense attorney Paul Applebaum also reviewed the charges against Eichorn and the others. I think that the U.S. attorney's motivation for assuming the prosecution against Mr. Eichorn has a powerful deterrent value that a federal case against a state senator generates, Applebaum said. So, make an example out of him. I do believe that these people need all of the charges. Smack them down hard. So this is an article that came out today. One of Justin Eichorn's uncles, he's getting threats pouring into his family business because of Justin Eichorn. It just goes to show that other people's debauchery can have tentacles. So stop being out here being debaucherous. Totally sure that that's a valid word. Former Minnesota State Senator Justin Eichorn is due back in court next week after being charged with soliciting with a minor, leading to his resignation on Thursday. Life comes at you fast. Just 4 days ago, he was out here trying to say Trump derangement syndrome is a mental illness. Now he's about to be locked up. They won't let him out. All right. It says that meanwhile, his family store in Grand Rapids, Glenn's Army Navy store, is now getting threats, according to his uncle and authorities. Rusty Eichorn told WCCO the news about his nephew is devastating, and threats to his outdoor and hunting shop are just adding insult to injury. He says there's a perception his nephew still works there when he hasn't been an employee there since 2016. He now says the shop has been getting a number of harassing and threatening phone calls, with some serious enough that he's had to call the police. When you hang up and they call back 10 times in a row, it's very troubling for my staff. The Grand Rapids Police Department confirmed to WCCO it had received reports of threatening calls to the business. A judge ordered Justin Eichorn to a halfway house, but he's still in Sherburne County Jail as of Friday morning while waiting for a bed to open up. He was also ordered to surrender his passport, wear a GPS monitor, and is being barred from having any unsupervised or unapproved contact with minors. Additionally, he's restricted from unsupervised or unapproved use of any devices with internet connection. He's expected back in court on Wednesday. I wonder how his wife and his 4 children are doing, knowing that they have this man as a family member. That has got to suck. These MAGA, they have a whole lot of people within the MAGA party that predatory, that's a word that goes along with these people. Anyways, let me know what you think about all this. Like, comment, and share. When Trump was campaigning, he was saying that he was going to bring down the cost of groceries. He was going to bring down inflation. And all he has done is jack everything up. The way he's trying to fire all these people is making people hold on to money. The way he's putting these tariffs on, taking them off, putting them on, or whatnot, it's causing people to boycott America. There's so much uncertainty in the economy because of Trump, and all of these things could have been avoided even if he just did nothing. So now they're talking about stagflation. They're saying this is from the Business Insider from yesterday. Stagflation can be worse than a recession. Investors are already bracing for it. It says investors are already bracing for one of the worst case scenarios for the U.S. economy. Over 70% of fund managers expect stagflation in the global economy in the next year. Fears picked up as the Fed raised its inflation forecast and cut its growth forecast for 2025. Fears of stagflation are gaining traction on Wall Street, with more investors anticipating an economic situation that entails high inflation and low growth over the next year. Stagflation is thought to be even harder for policymakers to deal with than a typical recession. While the Fed can normally cut interest rates to boost the economy, a stagflationary economy would leave the Fed's hands tied, as higher prices would prevent policymakers from lowering borrowing costs to stimulate growth. That situation, which ushered in a major economic slowdown and high unemployment in the 70s, is rising into view once more, with more investors eyeing the possibility of such an outcome. In a March Bank of America survey, 71% of fund managers said they expect to see stagflation in the global economy in the next year. The survey also found that money managers reduced their holdings of U.S. stocks in record amounts the week of March 7th to March 13th. Investors' fear picked up after the Fed's latest policy meeting on Wednesday, when the central bank lifted its inflation forecast and lowered its growth forecast for 2025. Policymakers now expect PCE inflation to be around 2.7 this year, up from December's projection of 2.5. So inflation was going down. It was going down, but now it's ticking back up. And all of this is because of Trump and all of the... I've already talked about it, but he's definitely making some dumb decisions. Real GDP, meanwhile, is expected to grow 1.7% this year, down from the previous forecast of 2.1. So how he just come in and just let it ride, the GDP would have risen. Now it's at 1.7%. Even before the Fed meeting, stagflation chatter was growing on Wall Street. UBS Global Wealth Management estimated the risk that the U.S. economy would experience a period of stagflation at 20%, up from the prior forecast of 15%. That's in part because of the pressures stemming from Trump's trade policy. Salida Marcelli, an investment chief at the firm, said in a note on Monday. Trump's trade policy, Trump's tariffs, Trump's trade war is going to cause a Trumpflation, Trumpcession. We expect aggressive trade policy to weigh on U.S. economic growth, but not so much as to drive the U.S. towards a recession or to prevent a recovery for equity markets. That said, last week we changed our scenarios to reflect that the risk around our central scenario are now skewed to the downside. The investment banking firm Stifel also said in its forecast that the U.S. economy could see a bout of mini stagflation in the second half of 2025 that could spark another sell-off in the stock market. Barry Bannister, the managing director of the firm, wrote in a note on Thursday. We see U.S. economic growth fading again more sharply into year-end 2025, as well as fewer Fed rate cuts than implied by futures. This is due to slowing economic growth combined with sticky inflation in 2H 2025E, a mild form of stagflation that is historically adverse for the broad equity market. So I don't know exactly what all of that means, but I do know that sharply into the year end, that means towards the end of the year is going to get even more jacked up. That is how I interpreted that. Y'all let me know what you think about this one. And here's hoping that Elon Musk continues to have a terrible rest of the year, maybe a terrible 7 to 15 years. Tesla owners are trading in their EVs at record levels. Data from Edmunds showed Tesla owners have been trading in their vehicles at record levels since Elon Musk joined Trump's White House. March represented the highest ever share Edmunds have seen of Tesla trade-ins towards new or used cars from brands sold at auto dealerships. Shifts in Tesla consumer sentiment could create an opportunity for legacy automakers and EV startups to gain ground. Since headed to Washington, D.C. in January as a central figure in the second Trump administration, Musk, who is the CEO of Tesla, has been slashing the federal workforce and government spending and has gained access to sensitive government computer systems and data through his efforts, though his efforts have been repeatedly challenged in court. Before assuming leadership in the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, Musk spent around $290 million last year to buy Donald Trump. While investors snapped up Tesla shares after Trump's victory in November, they've been rushing for the exit as of late, pushing the stock price down by 42% this year. Waves of protests have targeted Tesla facilities in the U.S. and beyond. Other criminal acts of vandalism and arson have targeted Tesla stores, vehicles, and charging stations across the U.S. In addition, Tesla is facing an increased competition from EV makers. In January, S&P Global Mobility found Tesla sales declined about 11% year over year in the United States, while Ford, Chevy, and Volkswagen bolstered their sales of EVs, picking up market share. I will say that some of this vandalism is pretty convenient. I mean, could it be that maybe Elon Musk and his henchmen are out here dousing and starting up fires? They could be for the insurance claim, because they know that the stock is down, because they know that all of this is surrounding Tesla, people returning cars, people boycotting buying Teslas. So maybe they're just trying to get some sympathy or something. And more bad news from Tesla. Yes, gotta love bad news. Nearly all Cybertrucks have been recalled because Tesla used the wrong glue. Tesla says it will fix the sticky issue, which could cause panels to detach from trucks while driving, with the new adhesive not prone to environmental embrittlement. This is such an ugly car. It was an ugly car before Elon Musk and Doge came around, but this is still, just looking at this is such a terribly made car. All right, it says Tesla said Thursday it would recall nearly all Cybertrucks it has produced to repair a stainless steel trim panel that the carmaker said could become detached from the vehicle while driving. It's the 8th recall for the distinctive all-electric pickup, which hit U.S. roads just over 2 years ago. Unlike many other Tesla-related recalls, though, this one cannot be fixed with over-the-air software update. The trucks must be brought into a service center for repairs. The recall affects more than 46,000 Cybertrucks manufactured between November 2023 and late February 2025. So hopefully people just get rid of these ugly cars. Tesla gets off of the road. People leave that company alone. Stocks plummet to hell, and Elon just disappears. I'm tired of that man. Anyways, let me know what you think about all of this. Join the conversations. Don't forget to like, comment, and share. I was tagged in this video, and this lady is talking about how the next economic collapse that rivals the 2008 housing bubble is coming. I want you to go ahead and watch this. This video is nearly 8 minutes long. I'll put her link in the description if you want to check out her TikTok page. But some of the things that she's saying is definitely something that you want to at least be aware of. Could happen. You never know. So go ahead and check this video out.
Last night, I started off by researching Hooters getting bankrupted by private equity and ended up uncovering the next 2008 level economic collapse. And they're hiding the bubble inside a private equity black box that makes it almost impossible to see what they're doing. Almost. This time, they're not going to collapse the banks and make it too big to fail. They're going to bankrupt the entire American pension system. I'm almost too afraid to make this video, but it has to be done, so let's get into it. In 2008, investors and bankers were able to crash the world's economy by engaging in risky, unethical bets and investments, and they did it right out in the open. They've learned, and this time they're doing it again. Bigger investments, bigger risks, same playbook, but they're doing it behind the smokescreen of private equity in bigger numbers. They're creating a bigger bubble than before, and it's not somewhere down the road. It's here, and it's about to pop. You see, for the last month, I've been trying to figure out why these companies that private equity had acquired were failing even though they were still succeeding. Joann's, 97% of their stores are still profitable. And yet they're still bankrupt. But they weren't bankrupt a year ago, and they still had the debt that private equity had stacked on them a year ago. So I wanted to know what changed. The same thing with Hooters. The same thing with... Now in 2024, private equity bankrupted 110 businesses. And that was almost double their previous record. There had been huge increases in the amount of bankruptcies each year over the past 3 years. But I didn't know what had changed because private equity had held many of these businesses for several years and they were still succeeding. Until I got my hands on an economic report and an article and found a term that nobody could explain to me. The term was back floating rate loans. I didn't know what that meant, and no article would explain it to me. So I had to go and do research in the financial prospectuses of a bunch of financial investment firms. Guys, in the last few years, private equity has taken out $3.8 trillion in adjustable rate loans. These are adjustable rate loans. These private equity firms took out adjustable rate loans. And so for the last 3 years, as our interest rates have gone up, every 30 to 60 days, the money due on the loans they stacked on top of these companies has gone up every 30 to 60 days. That's why these successful companies that private equity had acquired are suddenly bankrupt, even though they're still making money. They're bankrupt because they're paying adjustable rate loans. But it doesn't stop there. It gets so much worse because my next question is, why are the banks willing to give these risky loans to these private equity firms knowing it's going to cause them to fail? And the answer is because the banks aren't going to keep them on their books. The banks are immediately repackaging these adjustable rate loans as something called CLOs, right? Which are then packaged and sold off to our pension funds as really great debt. And they tell them that it's a diversified portfolio. Are you hearing The Big Short in real time? Literally, all of these companies are getting bankrupted in greater and greater numbers. And all of this debt is adjustable rate. And all of the bankruptcies are skyrocketing in this direction. And now, if you look at this graph, you can see that aside from 2020, which is obviously an anomaly, right now, private equity, that's the yellow section, has double the highest number of bankruptcies they'd ever had prior to last year. And that number is climbing this year, $3.8 trillion. $3.8 trillion in this debt, okay? I want you to look back to 2008. Do you want to know how many risky adjustable rate mortgages there were? $1.1 trillion. Do you want to know how many subprime but not quite as bad loans there were? $1.3 trillion. That was just in housing. In the $3.8 trillion held by private equity, They own the largest shares of the home ownership market in the United States, but they also own the daycares. They own the veterinary clinics. They own the pet stores. They own the nursing homes. They own the emergency rooms. They own the doctor's offices, the orthodontists. They own the builders. They own the HVAC companies. This isn't just housing. It's going to touch every single industry around us. And that is why, if this were a free market and private equity had not exploitatively gotten involved, if we had a free market and we could see what they were doing, these companies would be succeeding. If this were actually a free market, these companies would be succeeding. Joann's has 97% of their stores profitable. That is an astronomical number. 97% of a retail store is profitable, and they are failing and they are closing every store, and it is further consolidating an already consolidated environment. And now there are thousands and thousands of employees that will not have jobs. And there are thousands of other businesses that are going through the exact same thing right now. And why? Because they know we will never allow the banks to be bailed out again. We would literally riot in the streets. But we're definitely going to allow them to bail out the pensions, because that's our grandparents. That's our parents. That's the working class. They know that this will get bailed out. And because there's no regulatory authority, there are no laws stopping private equity from doing whatever they want, they know they can get away with it. And we can't do anything to stop them. The most important thing you need to understand is this wasn't done by accident. This was done by blatant, intentional greed. The private equity firms wanted the cheapest debt they could get, and they believed arrogantly that the debt would stay cheap forever. They had 0% interest rate loans for ages. And so they took on these adjustable rate notes thinking they could keep refinancing forever out of it. It was arrogant. But it also meant that they got to collect bigger fees because they were taking risky debt that cost less. The bankers were happy to give them because they got higher fees on offering bad debt. They were going to get paid no matter what. At the same time, the private equity firms mandated in their contracts with these companies they acquired that they were advisors and that they were a management company. So they also get paid that way. And then they sold the land out from under these companies and all their assets and made themselves whole before any of this even began. They're already cash positive. The banks knew they wouldn't be held accountable because they were going to bundle it up and pass it off to the pensions. And even the pensions were reckless because they're buying these mechanisms, because when you purchase into private equity, when you purchase private equity debt as a pension, you get to put on your books, especially if you have an underfunded pension, the projected gains for 10 years, which means for 10 years, it looks like that pension is more shored up than it is. And at the end of that 10 years, when it's time for that fund to close out, suddenly then all of the bad debt comes crashing down on the pension. But at that point, there's a new leader on the pension fund and they've kicked the can down the road. So even they were reckless. But at the bottom of all of this is the bankrupting of the fabric of our society. We are losing our businesses. We are losing our doctors. We are losing our orthodontists. We are losing our nursing homes. We are losing our funeral homes. And one by one, they're going to fall under the weight of this really horrible adjustable rate debt. And nobody is talking about it. I could only find 2 articles in very obscure financial magazines that even talk about these back floating rate loans. I have never been more terrified. And I talk about private equity a lot. I have a lot to say. But right now, all I want to do is get someone to pay attention that can make a difference in this, because we have a problem. We're not without any hope at all. Right now, private equity is only allowed to be this exploitative because they exist under something called the carried interest loophole, something that multiple Congresses have tried to close, but private equity continues to bribe politicians to fail to actually achieve. Trump, 3 weeks ago, said he wanted to close the carried interest loophole. I thought he was doing it as a fundraising maneuver. But he's doubled down on it repeatedly. If we can make enough noise about this, maybe we can get him to actually see it through and end private equity's stranglehold on our population. There's so much more that we have to go through, so this is going to be a multi-part series. But if you're new here, my name is Tiffany. We work together to fight private equity and save small businesses in our community, and it's going to take every single one of us to do so. So do all the things and stick around. I'm so glad you're here.